Should you grow biomass and flowers and other things under your fruit? I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead here at the Sustainable Homestead Institute, doing a follow-up on the wildflowers under fruit trees video we've done in the past. And I'm going to give you some updates about what works and what doesn't work, about some management techniques that are going to improve your fruit production. As you can see right here, there's still fruit on these trees, of which I'll enjoy before I leave, but other techniques that are going to help you with fertilization, improving yields, and also soil biology. Now, all of these are within the permaculture ethic, and it's on the basis of that polyculture, single sets of plants by themselves, don't have the ecosystem necessary to maintain soil biology. And so a lot of orchards will actually, they'll mow the grass really tight, they'll spray and pray, and they hope that that will reduce competition for the trees. But our thesis is, and evidence shows, that actually a greater diversity of plants, including grasses, nitrogen-fixing trees, and shrubs, herbs, and other things, will create a biosystem, an environment that encourages greater diversity, which in turn improves the overall growth of the fruit trees themselves. Now, let's give you some background. Originally, when I cleared this area up and I showed some videos of tillage, there'll be links in the description below. I planted cover crops and wildflower seeds. Now, as you'll notice today, all you can see is fobs and grass and other things that are not wildflowers. Even though it does bloom with wildflowers in season, it's actually September right now, it's very hot. But what you also see is new fruit trees interplanted, and they have a wire around them. Now, why do they have a wire around them? Well, it turns out that when you grow daikon radish and different types of wildflowers and things like that, the deer love these plants. And the deer will come in, as you can see right here, the deer will come in and eat everything. And so this one's kind of bent a little bit because the deer got up and rubbed against it and ate it. So in this particular environment, unless we excluded the deer, we weren't going to have wildflowers. Now, you can notice the size of the fruit trees in these videos versus previous videos. The fruit trees that are in the grow out areas tend to be a little bit larger. Now, these trees, because they have heavy browse on them, they are not pruned. And they're pruned if there's crossing branches, but they're typically not pruned. But what we ended up with was grasses and cover crops, and then whatever flowers came. Now, this has gone through sequences of herbs and other types of flowers and bulbed flowers and different things. But again, being out in the open like this, there is deer pressure, and the deer pressure is very heavy on these plants. However, by growing the biomass around the plants, we are giving the deer something to eat other than our fruit trees, because they haven't completely knocked over these frames that these new fruit trees are in. And by mowing around the area, we're still be able to get access to the area. Now, there's something interesting that's being done here that at Sustainable Homestead Institute, they've even included in a new course about raising your own chickens. But besides attracting pollinators, you can see the butterfly in there, besides growing biomass, which sequesters carbon, besides providing distractions for deer, so all this grass distracts deer from rubbing on the tree particularly, besides growing on contours to better conserve water and to get more moisture soakage, because again, the grasses have these long roots into the ground in a zone that's around the fruit trees themselves. So mowing out here gives us access. Not mowing in there gives us depth of root. But let me walk around here and show you something interesting. See, he's expanding out this space with additional fruit trees. But you might say, well, Justin, you're not doing a very good job of maintaining grass. There's these big, ugly spots out in the middle here that there's no grass. Well, if you zoom in closer, something that's happening here, and I gave you a clue earlier, raising chickens, there's actually space here where chickens are being raised on the grass. And now this blotch is temporary. It's very hot out. They haven't had a chance to grow. But when the fruit falls off the trees, because we're at the end of season, the fruit rolls in here, the chickens eat it all up. Meanwhile, the chickens manure on the ground. And you can see some of that manure here. And sometimes these areas are dragged and seeded. Sometimes there's other stuff that goes on. It just depends on the season. But now the vegetative strips around the fruit trees has an additional function of absorbing the surplus nutrients created by the agricultural activity of raising chickens. Now, in the next video, you're going to see how this can be adapted with other types of animals, other types of livestock, but chickens aren't going to scratch up the tree or break down branches or knock over new fruit trees. Chickens are somewhat controlled, being in the chicken tractor in the temporary fencing. But now the manure that's being created, and by the way, you see that area hasn't recovered, but as I pan this camera, those chickens have been in between every one of these rows of fruit trees. And that means those nutrients are being soaked into the soil. And as you can see, there is grass coverage between every area of the fruit trees. And I'm just going to walk through this long area here. You can see a variety of grasses. And so out here, the grass is allowed to grow a little bit longer. And then the chickens come through. And I know for a fact that what you're seeing in frame here has had chickens on it more than once. But what you're seeing is green, lush grass that's got body to it. Now, could you have rows set up in here for grazing larger animals? You could. This particular site has a nice corral area. It has a nice grazing areas. It doesn't need to have their cows out here. Doesn't necessarily need to have their goats out here. But yes, what you're seeing is because the fruit trees are on different rows. Now, I didn't design this. Scott Vernon of the Sustainable Homestead Institute designed this, and he laid these fruit trees out this way, and he suggested that we grow some biomass around the fruit trees because, again, it is a way to control water. What we've got here is a slope. There's a hardscape up at the top there where there's a gravel driveway, and any water that comes down here is going to keep going down there into the low area of the woods. So why not slow and spread that water? Now, at different times of the season, it is mowed differently. It just really depends, because after the chickens have gone through, sometimes it gets dragged, sometimes it gets mowed, because again, the chickens don't eat up to the electric fence. There's different kinds of seeds put out, mainly grass seed in the areas where there's grass, and then in the other areas, there might be cover crops put in after a periodic mow. Sometimes it gets scythed. It just really depends on what's going on. If there's a class over here, and the class is learning about scything, this provides that. But you can see, let me get you a good shot of this. You can see there's clover, which is nitrogen fixing, a variety of grasses. And then when that grows out, you can see kind of herbs and weeds and different kinds of things. There's almost like a forage in here. But again, it depends on what survives the deer, because these become a magnet for the deer. Now, you would think of as a magnet for the deer, would they be climbing up in the trees and eating the branches? Well, it's actually reduced the amount. They still eat the branches, but it's reduced the amount of eating, and the pruning is now not necessarily shaping, but just mainly keeping branches from crossing. Like I can see one there's a branch crossing in there, and this one's got a couple branches. You don't want to prune too much at a time. That's not the topic of this video. The key thing is to notice is that when these trees didn't have the distractions around them, when they didn't have the biomass, when they didn't have the new growth, when they didn't have the additional depth of root, they were struggling. Now, being that there's an area around them, there is more nutrient capture, greater sequestration of carbon and atmospheric nitrogen. There's healthy fruit falling, literally it's into season, and there's still fruit on the trees. Now, there's no herbicides, no pesticides, nothing put on these things. Well, that one's still kind of firm. Look at that apple right there. It's a little patchy, but that's going in my pocket, and I'll eat that later. Now, again, if you put up fencing, like, see how the garden has big fences? If he put up fencing in here and he put up a lot of infrastructure, maybe he could keep the deer out. Maybe he could keep the deer out. However, if he keeps growing abundance and more abundance, and you manage an area like this with the contours, and you manage the area, you don't need a lot of tillage. Technically, one of the things that's happening here is to get 2 passes from the chicken tractor. That's one of the reasons the grass is mowed up underneath the trees a little bit, is because if you can get 2 passes of the chicken tractor, we're now converting surplus grass into eggs. We're now having the insects eaten. while still attracting beneficial insects. Because remember, we wanted this originally to have wildflowers as pollination opportunity for the bees that are over here. And that's why a lot of this stuff is spread. So a lot of this stuff has spread for the purposes of pollination, beneficial insects, grazing area, wildlife area, additional fruit for people, and so much more. Look at this. Even though it's September, it's really pretty much the end of the season. It's super hot outside. There's still fruit on the trees. Now, there was no spray, there was no extra work done, and most of the work that was done to manage this has been seeding or the movement of animals. And so you can see the power of what's going on here. Now, is it blazing with wildflowers, an explosion of color? Not necessarily. Not necessarily, again, because of the deer pressure and such. But it's low maintenance, so the inputs are minimal, and the results are maximized. There aren't any pests in here or anything like that. If, like I've said in my other videos, if there were mice and the mice took a run across the little field here, there's these lanes that are gonna get caught by predatory birds. They'll get caught by the chickens. But just gander at that. Isn't that amazing? And so this is the last update in this series. You'll see in the description below links that show you the different things. I'm gonna have a link to that chicken training program that's available online now on raising your own chickens, and you'll see how you can get abundance through the manures of the chickens. There's no cleaning out hutches or anything like that. You're actually fertilizing the land, and then of course the vegetative strips catch that surplus nutrient so it doesn't run off, and it's just amazing. If you have questions, ask them in the description below. There are going to be a bunch of links to the previous videos so you can compare. Consider a natural way of managing your orchard with this example here at the Sustainable Homestead Institute. Thanks for watching.